Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on your location. We welcome you once again to our class discussions, our class thoughts in 1 Corinthians. This will be our last broadcast as the Hangouts on Air will disappear, and until we are able to find, until we are able to find a suitable method to have these broadcasts done in the very same way, this will be the last one that we'll have. So, my name, of course, Johnny Oxendine. There's Brother Sonny, Brother Brian, and Paul, and Michael who are with us today. We are coming to the end of our study in 1 Corinthians, and of course, as we have over the last several months, we've been looking at each chapter. Certain chapters we look at some things a little bit more in depth and incisively than others. Some we try to address and use some practical applications from that as well. But here we're at the end of our study in 1 Corinthians, and as we said, the last class at this time. And it's been for those of us who had the time and opportunity to have these discussions. And I want to say to everyone who is joining us today to thank you for participating in the variety of ways that you have, whether by simply being our audience, making comments, and certainly Michael Hatchell for hosting. All of this has been very much appreciated by me, and I think all of us leading to this last discussion that we're having today. To those who are in the UK, we are looking forward to seeing many of you brethren in October, Lord willing, for the English lecture series and the wonderful hospitality and fellowship that we enjoy with you. Those lectureships are planned, by the way, for October 15 in Cambridge at the Chesterton Community College on Gilbert Road in Cambridge, and October 22nd in London at the Point Church of Christ. We'll give you the address or have that address made available to you later. Any other thoughts before we get into the discussion about what we've been able to do over the last few years together? Michael, we'll start with you just quickly.
No, not really. Just...
Okay. Sonny, Paul?
No, well, if the voice mic has nothing to add, I would agree with him. How about you, Brian?
Same, yeah.
Okay, well, we'll move on then. We have had a good time together. We had hoped that we were able to broaden it out and include some other brethren, but unfortunately it didn't work out that way. However, today we want to move on and cover some areas that Paul addresses at the end of 1 Corinthians 15, and of course also some things that we find in chapter 16. Last week we covered an area that brought us down in our discussion all the way down to verse 22, 23, maybe a little bit further than that. But the points that I want to look at today, actually no, it was in the 30s. But the point I'd like to look at today is we were looking at evil communications, corrupt good manners, and in his discussion to the brethren to awake to righteousness. Some have not the knowledge of God. We talked about the influence that others have over us and how we come to allow people to influence us in a variety of ways, one in the church and outside the church. Today I'd like to look at something that's been discussed. I'll go ahead and read it first. Paul begins to talk about it down in verse 35. And he really and this really carries through to the end of the chapter. But some man will say, how are the dead raised, and with what body do they come? I'll just stop right there with that question, because that is a question that often comes up, doesn't it, Michael? What are we going to look like? What is the body going to be? What will our new bodies look like? How will someone have a body that was blown up in a bomb or died at sea? I think, and this is in reading the rest of these verses, and perhaps I'll just go ahead and read it first so that we can see the context. Paul writes, under the influence of the Spirit of God, "Thou fool, that which thou sowest is not quickened, except it die. And that which thou sowest not the body that shall be, but bare grain. It may chance of wheat or of some other grain. But God giveth the body as it pleased him, and to every seed his own body. All flesh is not the same flesh, but there is one kind of flesh of men, another of beasts, another flesh of beasts, another of fishes, another of birds. There are also celestial bodies and bodies terrestrial, but the glory of the celestial is one, and the glory of terrestrial is another. There is one glory of the sun, and another glory of the moon, another glory of the stars, and one star differeth one from another star in glory. He continues to come down with various examples here. So also is the resurrection of the dead. It is sown in corruption, it is raised in incorruption. Sown in dishonor, raised in glory. Sown in weakness, raised in power. It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. There's a natural body, there's a spiritual body. He continues to go down in his discussion with this. This also, with reference to Adam, the first man, Adam, was made a living soul. Adam was made a quickening spirit. But he talks about that as the natural body, and of course Christ the spiritual body. The first man is of the earth, earthly. The second man is the Lord from heaven. As he continues down through this section till the end of the chapter, now get to the point that I was making earlier. Michael, it seems to me that Paul answers that question right there that's always asked. The question that people always ask is sitting right there, unless I have misinterpreted in some way, and if so, I'm certainly willing to be corrected on that. But it seems that the answer is there, is it not?
It's there, but it's not there.
Explain.
He does answer that question, but he doesn't tell us other than it being a spiritual body or an immortal body. That's what people are asking. What's it like? What's it going to be like?
But doesn't the scripture say we don't know what we will be like, but we know that we will be like him?
Yeah, and that's the point. And basically, that doesn't satisfy people to tell them that.
Well, it satisfies me. I don't need to know. I do. People want to know if they're going to still have their gorgeous blonde hair or their blue eyes or their, I understand that, but that so misses the point. It so misses the point. God will provide us with a new body to his pleasing. And whatever it will be like him, with reference to the scripture. So what difference does it make? If we're going to be in the glory of God, what difference does it make?
Well, that would be the thing. It doesn't make any difference. I think the problem is, in reality, people get so hung up on the physical.
Well, isn't that the larger problem anyway?
Yeah, it is. But just like you said, people, am I going to have this gorgeous blonde hair that that you and I don't have? Or
that's why I use that.
But they get involved in that type of an attitude, and as a result, they miss the bigger picture because they are so physically oriented.
And that's so disappointing in many ways. But once people come to understand from a spiritual point of view, and the values become more inherently spiritual and less focused on the physical, that would be a satisfactory answer. It just really has amazed me that people obsess over that particular area of discussion. I have never seen anyone that once you explain it to them, as you said, a lot of people just aren't satisfied with that. Well, will I look like a Martian? Am I going to have my fingers? It's so ridiculous.
Well, that along with these type of discussions, are there going to be rewards in varying rewards in heaven?
You know what? Here is my thinking, just on a very basic level. If we're pleasing to the Lord and we do what we are commanded to do in the scriptures, and we find ourselves in the presence of God after the day of judgment, I am not really concerned about if someone's going to have more blessings than I am, or anything like that. I already read Dante, so those people, they had their own problems going in the other direction. But that's like the disciples were asking also. Can we sit next to you in the king? It's the same thing, or at least to me it seems like it's the same thing.
While I have explained my view on it, that some people's capacity to enjoy heaven might be greater than someone else's, who cares? As long as I'm in the presence of God and in heaven, who cares?
Sonny, have you come across people who have had those questions?
No, not really. No, not that I know of. But in any event, like what Michael said, it's true that once you get your feet through the gates of heaven, who cares? I think it's quite kind of odd that for somebody to find himself in heaven and yet dissatisfied what he gets, I don't think that he will be there.
You're fortunate in not having had to hear people with those questions, because you do get that sort of line of questioning sometimes in the U.S. and maybe it is simply reflective of the ongoing materiality, though Europe's not that different. But it really does seem to be one of those things that people just can't get past it. I seem to have a hair. I remember during a sermon, and this I think I may have mentioned, where this lady was visiting, and after the sermon, she came up to me and she said she really enjoyed the sermon, but she was disappointed that I hadn't spoken in tongues. And I thought, okay, well, even after we went through Acts 2, she wasn't satisfied. She just wasn't satisfied. Even though the Bible clearly explains what tongues are, she wasn't going to have it. And as you said, Sonny, for someone to be in heaven and looking for an extra cheese plate or something like that, it just boggles the mind. It tells you how misplaced some people's value. It tells us a lot about how people misunderstand what the church itself is. I think if people have those kinds of questions, or the relative merits that one is going to have or enjoy in heaven, I think that they've missed the point of the church itself, and probably lack wisdom and an understanding, obviously a proper understanding of the scriptures. They would hardly be a person that perhaps even understood Jesus washing his disciples' feet. You have to wonder sometimes if, we all have different levels of knowledge and understanding, and we all have different levels of appreciation in so many things. One person can see a certain automobile and have a greater appreciation for certain parts than another. But when it comes to something as vastly superior in terms of importance as our eternal salvation and our soul and our eternal place with God, it is almost mind-boggling that one still looks for something that is basically material. It still boggles my mind on that. But let us move forward a little bit past that. I just think that if you read chapter 15, beginning with those verses 35 and following, Paul there makes he answers the question, and as Michael says, he answers it and he doesn't answer it. He gives us the answer that we need, which of course is what God has always done. He gives us what we need to know. Anything other than that, people, they say, well, are the streets really going to be of gold? Or all these sorts of things. You just have to say, you know what? Let's get there first. And once we get there, then you can ask those questions if you like. But when we look at the close of chapter 15, beginning with verse 53, for this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So when this corruptible shall have put on incorruption, and this mortal shall have put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. That's what we are looking for. O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? The sting of death is sin, the strength of sin is the law, but thanks be to God, which giveth us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as you know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Those words are words of tremendous encouragement to everyone who is working to their utmost ability to not only get to heaven themselves, but to help others get to heaven, which, of course, is another purpose for which we live in this mortal body. When we go over to chapter 16, the first two verses are verses that we have heard and discussed many, many times. And so we're familiar with those verses with regard to the collection. But I'd like to look at those verses and speak briefly about them in really two areas. One is, I guess, rhetorical and simple enough when we discuss money. People don't like to talk about money. Concerning the collection for the saints, as I give order to the churches of Galatia, even so do ye. Upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in stores. God has prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come. Now, there are a lot of different ways that one could go into a discussion with regard to this, but in the more basic way with regard to collection and money, this again, I think, though really quite a different subject, is one that also becomes an obsession with many brethren. The question always comes up, how much should I give? Another question that comes up after the question, how much should I give? And maybe even before that question comes up, the question comes up, how much are you paying the preacher? You know, and I think more than anything else, those are the two questions I usually hear. What about you, Michael?
Well, here I don't hear that.
Well, no, you don't hear, because you notice, Sonny. We won't go there.
But that generally is one of the major questions.
Why is that? Why now? Just for the audience, because I think everyone here probably understands it, but why is that such an obsession with people? What do you pay the preacher?
Because there was I don't know if it was so much teaching, but the idea was perpetrated among members that preachers are the ones who have to sacrifice. And it was kind of ingrained because you had some rich preachers. They were rich from the standpoint of secular work, would not take pay. And congregations got that feeling that you shouldn't take pay, or you shouldn't pay the preacher as a result. And then there's jealousy on the part of some. You can't pay the preacher more than I'm making, surely. I mean, that would be horrified to think that you might pay the preacher more than the poorest member of the congregation. And that then there's also been, for some reason, the thoughts through the years that, preachers don't have to work anyway. They only work 3 hours.
You're saying that what they do, it doesn't take that much to do it.
Well, there's the old joke, preachers only work 3 hours a week. Mm-hmm. And some people, while they might not actually say that, that really is their thinking. And so, you don't, he'd just sing in his comfy office doing nothing all day long.
And they want you to, in some places they want you, you have to be in the office, you have to have office hours. I'm not surprised that some places don't try to put up a time clock. It really is a devaluation of the gospel in so many ways.
Yeah, it is. That's what it does eventually. But
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Those are the feelings that people have had through the years, and they have very well made them known. Then you've got some preachers out there who have almost perpetrated that feeling with the doctrine of anti-located preachers.
Catch your side, right?
Catch your side and Garrett finally went into that, is true. So you've got all of those things working together, but there has been very clearly a denigration of the preacher and his work.
And an elevation of song leaders.
Well, I know some places who do pay the song leader. Now, I don't know if, they pay him more than the preacher, but
maybe. But that does seem to be, unfortunately, something that through the years has not abated. We still have a lack of appreciation for the preaching and teaching of the gospel and all the time that is involved in it, from study and reflect. I mean, everything that one knows. Now, of course, the preacher is quite often the face of the congregation. Even when you have elders, the preacher is often seen as the face of the congregation, and oftentimes elders will see the preacher as the face of the congregation. So there's a lot of responsibility in that. But as much as people obsess over how much the preacher is paid, I don't see any of them wanting to make a similar assessment with looking at what we go back to the Old Testament and look at what it was that they were asked to give in terms of what they give today.
V.P. Black, wrote the 3 books on giving that have been used through the years. And in his the books that he gave, the figures that he gave, basically that they gave over 30% is what it totaled up. So, we hear talk about tithing today a lot. Not bound upon us as Christians. It was something in the Old Testament, but even in the Old Testament, it wasn't tithing. It was more like 30%.
Yeah, the idea of that is minimized by the fact that that's only addressed from a particular particular slice of their total estate, so to speak. So that and it is in that contradiction or hypocrisy, I think. You hear people that are so concerned about what they pay the preacher, what the preacher gets. Oh, look at that! He's got a new car. Parentheses, first one in 20 years or 10 years. Oh, he's got a new suit. He's got a new tie. Where did he get that money? It is, again, now this doesn't happen in places where people are being, well, let me say, it doesn't become an issue in places where people are taught properly and there's a spiritual nature to the congregation generally. You don't have those kinds. I mean, you could have a person in any congregation having those thoughts. He may not express them, but they could have those thoughts. But when people are taught the gospel and they value and appreciate the teaching that they're receiving, they can see their own spiritual growth as a result of those things that are preached and taught. The encouragement, study, involvement, participation in a variety of activities which the church offers, they're not going to even think about that. I mean, because they understand that this is another gift, in a manner of speaking, that has come as a result of the gospel itself. The very fact that they now understand the beauty of the Christian life and everything that they're in, that won't even be a consideration. I mean, it wouldn't even be a consideration. How much do I give? Again, you often have that question. Many times, new converts will ask that question, and people, he talks about the righteousness of the Pharisees and so forth. But yes, it's around 30%. You have people who give. I won't say 30%, but who give certainly a lot more than 10%. I have to say that one brother had written an article that said that if the members of the church did just give 10%, you wouldn't have any financial issues in the church today. If they did hold to that 10% floor, there wouldn't be any issues in the church today. But be that as it may,
put by one person that we wouldn't know what to do with the money.
Well, there are so many things that can be done with the money. As a matter of fact, this past Wednesday we were using. I forgot to make that order with Denise, so I'll have to send that to her. But we were using the typology handbook, lectureship book, in our study. I think it was the John West chapter on Adam. And people were making notes in the book and looking up the verses, and I mean, those are the kinds of things that you become more appreciative of as you continue in your study of the scriptures. The opportunity to have materials provided by brethren throughout the brotherhood, the idea that you can go and make some notes, go back, refer to it, use it again in a study that's private. All of those things, you don't really worry. You shouldn't really worry about where's the money going. If you have leadership that is doing what the Lord requires, if you have elders and preachers doing what the Lord expects, things will be, and you're going to be busy. And you're going to be busy even if they don't ask you to be busy. You're going to be busy because you're going to be volunteering. You're going to be busy because you're going to be studying and preparing for the Bible classes on Sundays and Wednesdays, or whenever you have them at your local congregation. So I think that in many ways it's a reflection of one's commitment to the Lord in general, and I think, or overall, I think what our attitude about giving says about our whole spiritual life and understanding of the gospel. I think that that's what we see. I know that in the States, various places, many of the places that I see, the contributions are generous. The people are generous with contributions. And I think that speaks well of the teaching that goes on there. Another side point, we've mentioned it once before, but of course the understanding of it is reasonable. Some preachers don't like to preach on giving, and that's because they're expecting a backlash. He's just looking for a raise. He just wants some extra money to, it's something along those lines. And again, I think that when people's minds go in that direction, it shows a lack of gratitude for the blessings that they have from God. It shows a sheer and abominable perspective toward the gospel. I think that it denigrates the honor of the role of the person who preaches for a congregation, the work and labor that goes into preparation of sermons. Unless you do that, you just don't have any idea of what it takes to do that on a regular basis, and teaching classes and so forth. So, and I want to add this also, Michael, because I think this is a point maybe you well, let me just see what your thoughts are about it. Preachers, just like everyone else, have to have tools. They have to have some tools. And of course, a person can say, well, all I need is the Bible, and I'm not going to argue with that. But one can enhance one's study and, as a result, enhance one's teaching when they have a good tool set. Now, would a congregation, now let me ask this question, because I know this is not the case with most, but wouldn't a congregation, or should a congregation consider that without making any purchase, wouldn't a congregation also consider that a part of a preacher's salary, or the money that's paid the preacher, that he's going to have to purchase some things that are going to enhance his job?
Yes. I think a good practice that some have, although it's not very prevalent in the church, is a book fund, where the congregation designates a certain amount of money that they give him simply for the buying of books. I think it's good practice. I know here, I think you've seen the library that the church has here.
Yes.
It's an excellent library. The reason that is, in years past, they budgeted $1,000 a year for the buying of books for the library here. After they got, it's a pretty extensive library, they reduced it to 500, and now then we really don't need the books being bought now. So, but they budgeted that. It was for, it taught people the need for and value of, the need for books.
Now let me ask you this: how did that come up? How was that proposed to the congregation? And before you answer, we did something similar in San Mateo, not nearly as extensive as what you have in Bellevue, but the congregation, we were fortunate to build a small library there. We set up a system whereby many of the books are they fall into all the different categories, whether it's lectureship books or language books or translations, etc., lexicons and so forth, all kinds of books. But we also set up a system whereby people could, almost like a library, could check out certain books. Not all of the books or all kinds of books, but certain books they could check out. They write the information in a little book, and they could, for a few weeks or so, and then return them. And of course, we didn't need a librarian for that. But it was that sort of thing that we were able to do for a while. And then, as you said, you reach a stage where you don't need any more books or more books. We usually buy books for our classes now, really. That's where we buy our lectureship books many times. But go ahead with what you were saying.
Well, I don't really know how it came about. It was they already had a pretty extensive library when I moved here. It continued to grow while I was here. We will still buy books on occasion for the library, but it's not really budgeted like that now. Mm-hmm. I don't really know how they got instituted it, but I think it's good practice. And just like what y'all are doing, it at least teaches people the need to have those tools, and that you need those tools, especially as a preacher. You know that I have a pretty extensive Logos library. I think a lot of the members here would be just flabbergasted at the money that I've invested in it.
Now that's a little bit different than not appreciating the gospel from the standpoint of how much you pay a preacher.
No, it's not the same.
Right. I just want to point that out. It's not the same thing.
It's totally different. They recognize the need for it, but a lot of times they don't recognize the cost of it. Especially, and this kind of goes back to our lectureship books, not only here, but brotherhood-wise. You take a book like we published. Here's our Refuting Eschatology book.
Mm-hmm.
You take that in a academic setting, it's almost 400 pages. You're talking about paying over $100 very possibly for a book like that. And we were very uncomfortable having to sell it for $25 just to basically break even. People don't realize the value of those books because we've kept the prices low because congregations and brethren didn't want to make money on the brethren.
Well, you don't want to make money on the brethren, and people are very apprehensive about paying $25 for a book. Around 17, 15, 17, you can get that. But 25, they're very hesitant. They're very hesitant. And anything under 20 is kind of it goes along with that impulse buy.
Mm-hmm. You get above 20 though, and then you have to stop and think.
But it does go when we were going back to our original point of entry here, the idea of preachers having tools. And congregations understanding that part of what goes into the whole package for the preacher should be an expectation to include certain things that he's going to need. Now, this is not about buying him a brand new Cadillac or something like that. And I don't even know how they let you have a car since so you can just walk to work. But when you look, a preacher should look reasonably nice. He doesn't have to have Brioni suits or anything like that. But you should look nice. You should be able to have tools to study that enhance your teaching. That should be, when again you think about part of one's package, that should be something that's given some thought. And again, from the other side, you could have preachers who will simply not pay any money for tools. I can't imagine a carpenter or a plumber or anyone else who has a particular job not having the tools to do that job.
But you also, in that, and I know this isn't, it's related, but it's not directly aspect of it, but is the attitude of brethren toward preachers and their work. What is their work? And I'll just relay this experience that I had years ago in trying to apply for jobs and preaching jobs. And one congregation I contacted, they basically said, we don't care if you're even prepared for a lesson or a sermon. If you're out visiting people and you don't have time to prepare anything, that's fine with us. Well, needless to say, That was my last contact with them. But
You know, when Jesus was talking with Peter, you know, in John, he says, "Do you love?" You know, that conversation, "Feed my sheep." When you look at Paul's conversation with the elders at Miletus, you know, feed the household of God. I mean, there is it's sprinkled throughout all the Bible the importance of teaching, rightly dividing the word of truth. Ephesians 4, equipping the saints for the ministry. How could anyone not see the importance of that?
but and I agree with you. I'm just saying from the standpoint of those people, those brethren, you would never convince them of the need for those types of tools. And the reason is, I'm talking about book tools and such, and the reason is because of their attitude and view of preaching.
I think that Johnny, can I share with you some of my thoughts?
Sure.
I think that the problem lies with the terminology. You know, throughout your conversation with Mike, I've been listening to this closely. You know, you're talking about how much do you pay your preacher. So the word pay seems to suggest that there is a superior, there's an inferior. So there is a differing level. Like when I pay you, it suggests that I might be employing you to do a job, and I'm your boss, so I'm up there higher than you are. This is where I think that the problem lies. You see, when you talk about paying somebody to do a job, but the Bible doesn't talk about paying somebody to do a job. Because the passage you just quoted from 1 Corinthians 16, verse 1, it says they're now concerning the collection for the saints. So it is a collection for the saints. In other words, the term collection implies a support. So when you talk about support, you're creating a mindset that we are equals. I'm supporting you in your work. Paul writes to the saints in Rome, in Romans 16 as well, verse 1. He said that I commend to you Phoebe, our sister, who is a servant of the church in Cenchrea, that you may receive her in the Lord in a manner worthy of the saints and assist her in whatever business she has need of you. Support. So I think that's the terminology I think that we need to start using and instilling in the minds of the brethren, that the preacher is not the worker. The preacher is the one who is a servant whom we need to support. We are fellow workers. So
I think that usually that is the term. Well, I think we usually discuss it from the standpoint of support. I think that the people who address it, they usually use the terminology of paying the preacher.
Yes, so this is where I think that the teaching needs to be right, you see, in the sense that we are not talking about paying the preacher, we're talking about supporting the preacher. So that when you talk about support, the mindset is different, isn't it? You approach it at a different level because we are actually fellow workers, in other words. So let's help each other out. Then the level of remuneration will not be so much of an issue if the church provides more support to the preacher. Because yes, the preacher is doing the Lord a service and doing us a service, and therefore we need to support him in the work.
And I would say that a number of places. I think like where David is, where a lot of the brethren that we know are, where Michael, we're here in San Mateo. I think that the congregations generally have that mindset, the understanding of support. I think that when you find places where it's a problem, that the terminology generally does turn back to what are we paying the preacher?
Yes, I've seen myself. I think that I mentioned on previous occasions before in a previous congregation I was a member of. I think that Brian, you were as well. That when the worship committee got together to discuss the contract of employment for the preachers, the ministers, that there were so many issues about the salary, as you call it. I mean, I had to remind the brethren that that they are not our employees. They are servants in the Lord, and we are supporting them. And like you rightly say so. I mean, there's the use of terminology itself that if you use a contract employment, it suggests a superior and inferior, and therefore that of course that not many bosses are happy to pay their workers a bit more, than they should, and hence that we had so many issues over the salary of the ministers then. So I think this is where I think the church needs to be taught rightly. Look at it in terms of support, which is biblical, that when you support somebody, that then you're talking about supporting from the heart. It's not a matter of just doing it, but you're doing it from the heart because you want to support the preacher, the minister, the evangelist, whoever he is working for the Lord. So that everybody plays a part on a level playing field.
Yes, and that's what I was saying earlier about our attitude about giving. Giving speaks to the whole spiritual life and understanding the gospel. It's something that when you understand that it is support, and this is again not a problem that we're facing or a number of places are facing, but it is one that comes up and you hear people speak about it in those particular terms. What are we paying the preacher? What are you paying the preacher? They tend to view it that way, unfortunately. So that is again one of the other things that as we come close to the close for our discussion, one of the things that oftentimes I will put up on our Facebook site for the churches some sort of encouragement to look at different things that are available to enhance one's study, things that people can look at and choose from or investigate for themselves, because in the world in which we live, which is now certainly a mobile world, having the availability of a large library wherever you're traveling, or a sizable part of your library where you're traveling, could be very much helpful. Could be very helpful to you when you're studying. Able to bring into a study language and a lot of things that you just can't carry around much anymore. I remember when I first, I think it was when I first became a Christian, my first, maybe it was even before, no, it was after I think I was baptized. I remember every time I went into the building, I had a briefcase, Michael, and I I had a briefcase with a couple Bibles and some lexicons and grammar things, and a lot of the people there looked at me. It's like, boy, what is wrong with that man? And I'd open it up and take my things out, and I just sort of thought that's what I need. That's what I want when I'm studying. If Noah at the time is going over a passage, I'd like to be able to look and see. He usually was good at telling us what a particular Greek word meant, but I wanted to look at it for myself and continue with the study from there. But now with tablets and even cell phones, even with the smartphone and a tablet, or you can have the Bible and a variety of tools right available, right in the palm of your hand. I think preachers should look at what they can use to make their presentations of biblical material much more compelling, and I say compelling not from the standpoint of entertainment, but looking in depth at the material that we have. There's so many levels to everything that's in the scriptures, and being able to bring that out, I think, is another thing that is important, I think, in helping to make, and passion, having some passion for what you're doing, I think, is very important. Last point before we go, in chapter 16, verse 9, Paul talks about the fact that we're always going to have adversaries. And I think that in the work of the Lord, the work that we all try to do for the gospel, that we should expect that there are going to always be those who are opposed to it, who are against us, that when these various enemies of the cross come in our path, that we might view them more with disappointment than allowing them to discourage us. I always try to stay away from the word discouraged, though I know you can make a case for that, but I like the word disappointment or disappointing. But I think that as we continue to try to do what's right, we can expect that there are going to be adversaries to that attempt, whether it be in the form of governments, whether it be in the form of family, whether it be in the form of business. The Christian should expect that in this life, the attempt to do what's right will always be met with opposition. Any closing thoughts? Again, I want to just thank everyone for their support and participation in these class discussions. We want to try to stay in touch with each other on an ongoing basis. But as we close out, any closing thoughts? Sonny and Brian?
No, not from me.
Brian's saving everything he has to say until we get over there. Then he will never stop talking.
Well, we have
That's
our, we have our
okay.
lunch together.
I
We'll have-
enjoy it. I enjoy it. I'm looking forward to that. You have no idea how much I'm looking forward to that.
Mm.
Sonny?
I think it's been a great opportunity here to be able to study and discuss some of the issues in this book itself, and I think there's a lot more we can learn from the book itself, but unfortunately the opportunities are not available with the closing of whatever the changes in Hangouts is taking place. Hopefully that we will be able to find an alternative to this and
A different type of client.
progress. That's right, yeah. And thanks, Johnny, for the time as well, and Michael.
Well, I thank you. I don't think Google knows what they're going to do with this. You know, I don't think they know. Paul?
Hi there, Michael. Sorry, Johnny. Nothing from me, thank you. But once again, just a big thank you for bringing us these lessons, and thank you to Michael as well for hosting them.
Yes, especially Michael. He's done a yeoman's task in doing this, and we appreciate that. Michael?
I appreciate you teaching this. It's 1 Corinthians is such a great book, and having these brethren in London joining us. This is going 3 to 4 years now, and
It's been a while.
been a while that we've been engaged in these studies. So to continue on like this is very commendable.
So we will bring this to a close. We want to thank our audience, those who have had the opportunity to join us, those who have watched the videos online. We want to thank you so much, and of course any comments are welcome. Once again, we are coming to a close in our study of 1 Corinthians. We want to thank everyone who has been a part of the class discussions, and we certainly thank those who have watched and encouraged us. We will be closing down. We'll say goodbye to all. The brethren in the UK, we look forward to seeing, Lord willing, next month.